There's a sound that plays in the back of every nightmare. It's not a scream, it's not footsteps, it's the sound of a door closing from the outside. Right now, somewhere in the world, someone is walking into a space they believe is safe. A bedroom, a basement, a truck cab with a sleeper berth and a lock on the door. They don't know it yet, but they've just crossed a threshold that only goes one direction. What is the exact moment when a space stops being a shelter and becomes a predator? Because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. Let's start with the most impossible story of all, the one where the victim called for help while the predator slept 3 feet away. Case number 1, Shawn Grate, The Whisper at 4 a.m., Ashland, Ohio. Why do victims sometimes protect their captors even when rescue is seconds away? September 13th, 2016, 4:17 a.m. A 911 dispatcher in Ashland, Ohio, receives a call that will be studied in law enforcement training for the next decade. The voice on the other end is barely audible, not because of a bad connection, because the caller is whispering, "I've been abducted." The dispatcher asks her to repeat, "I've been abducted. I'm in house. He's asleep." Now here's where your brain wants to solve this story too quickly. You're thinking, call came in, police rushed over, woman saved, roll credits. But that's not what happened, because the woman on that phone had been in that house for 3 days. 3 days of knowing where the door was. 3 days of being alone with him while he slept, ate, showered, watched TV. So why didn't she run on day 1? That question, that single question, is going to haunt every story you hear tonight. Because the answer isn't about locks, it's not about ropes or chains or physical barriers. It's about something far more sophisticated. The dispatcher keeps her on the line for 13 minutes. 13 minutes of whispered directions, street names spelled out letter by letter, descriptions of the room she's trapped in. And then she says something that makes the dispatcher's blood stop. "There's a smell, like something dead. It's coming from behind the wall." The dispatcher doesn't wait. Units are already rolling, but now they're rolling faster. When the first officers arrive at 516 Covert Court, they don't knock, they don't announce themselves. They move through that house like it's on fire, because in a way, it is. Body cam footage shows Officer Mike McCausland entering a second-floor bedroom. There's a man asleep on a mattress on the floor. Beside him, duct tape, zip ties, a roll of plastic sheeting. And sitting on the edge of that mattress, phone still in her hand, is the woman who made the call. She doesn't run to the officers. She doesn't cry out. She just sits there. This is the threshold paradox. Shawn Grate wakes up to a gun in his face. He doesn't fight, doesn't ask questions. He just smiles, that slow, knowing smile of someone who's been expecting this. "Took you long enough," he says. The officers cuff him, lead him downstairs, and that's when they start opening doors. In the basement, they find the source of the smell. 2 bodies. One wrapped in plastic, stuffed into a crawl space. The other hidden behind a false wall Grate had built himself. But here's the part that breaks the pattern. The woman upstairs, she wasn't his first captive in that house. She was his third. The other 2 never got to make a phone call. If you've ever felt frozen in a moment where you knew you should run, should scream, should fight, but didn't, you're beginning to understand what happened in that room. This isn't weakness, it's architecture, and Shawn Grate was a builder. 6 hours after his arrest, Shawn Grate sits in an interrogation room and does something almost no killer does. He confesses. Not because he's remorseful, not because he's trying to cut a deal, but because he wants to explain. He tells the detective, "People think it just happens, like you wake up one day and decide to hurt someone, but it's not like that. You have to prepare the space first. You have to make it so they can't even imagine leaving." The detective leans forward. "How do you do that?" Grate smiles again. "You make them need you." This is the threshold paradox. Grate didn't just imprison his victims physically, he imprisoned them cognitively. He controlled food, water, information about the outside world. He alternated between violence and gentleness in unpredictable patterns, creating what psychologists call trauma bonding. By day 3, the woman who called 911 wasn't just afraid of him, she was afraid of what would happen if he woke up and found her gone. That's not Stockholm Syndrome, that's something deeper. That's the space itself becoming a predator. During the trial, prosecutors presented evidence that Grate had been perfecting this technique for years. He'd broken into homes across Ohio, not to steal, but to practice, to see how long he could stay undetected, to map out the cognitive architecture of control. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Death penalty. But before sentencing, the survivor, the woman who whispered into that phone at 4 a.m., took the stand. She didn't look at Grate. She looked at the jury. "He didn't just take 3 days from me," she said. "He took my ability to feel safe in any room ever again, because now I know how easy it is, how quiet it happens, how you can be in danger and not even know the door has already closed. It happens quietly." The question isn't whether you'd recognize a predator. The question is whether you'd recognize the moment the room itself turned against you. Shawn Grate understood that, but he wasn't the first, and he's not even close to the most terrifying, because our next case involves a man who didn't just build a trap, he advertised it on Amazon, in blazing daylight, and no one believed it was real.
Case number 2. Todd Kohlhepp. The algorithm knew. Woodruff, South Carolina. The digital confession.
What happens when a killer tells the truth and everyone thinks it's a joke? November 3rd, 2016. A property deed search in Spartanburg County, South Carolina, pulls up 95 acres registered to a local realtor named Todd Kohlhepp. The land is remote, heavily wooded, the kind of place where you can scream and the only thing that hears you is the wind. A woman named Kala Brown has been missing for 2 months. Her boyfriend, Charlie Carver, vanished the same day. The last ping from Kala's phone placed her somewhere on this property. When the deputies arrive, they fan out across the acreage with search dogs. It takes them 40 minutes to find it. A large shipping container, the kind used for overseas freight, painted green to blend with the trees, secured with a heavy-duty padlock. One of the deputies presses his ear to the metal and hears banging from inside. They cut the lock, swing the door open, and there she is, Kala Brown, chained by the neck to the interior wall, 65 days in the dark. The first thing she says isn't, "Help me." It's, "He's dead, isn't he?" She means Charlie. The officers don't answer because they don't know yet, but by the end of the day, they will. Where is Charlie Carver? Here's where the story breaks your brain. Todd Kohlhepp wasn't some drifter, wasn't a loner living off the grid. He was a successful realtor, owned multiple properties, drove a nice car, had a clean haircut and a firm handshake. He was the guy you'd hire to sell your house. But there was one place where the mask slipped. Amazon. Between 2014 and 2016, Todd Kohlhepp left over 100 product reviews on Amazon, and if you read them now, with the knowledge of what he was doing, they become a confession written in plain sight. Review for a padlock. Solid construction will hold secure for long-term storage of heavy items. Review for a shovel. Keep in car when you have to hide the bodies and you left the full-size shovel at home. Review for a tactical knife. Haven't stabbed anyone, yet. At the time, people thought he was being edgy, dark humor. The internet laughed, but he wasn't joking. He was documenting. We saw it and did nothing. When forensic teams processed the container, they found evidence of engineering. This wasn't a makeshift prison, it was designed. Ventilation holes drilled at precise intervals to keep oxygen levels just high enough, a bucket system for waste, chains measured to allow movement but prevent reaching the door. And something else, soundproofing foam on the interior walls. Because Todd Kohlhepp knew that on 95 acres, you don't need soundproofing to keep people from hearing screams. You need it to keep the screams from driving you insane. Carla Brown told investigators that Kohlhepp visited her every few days, brought food, water, talked to her like they were neighbors. He'd tell me about his day, about the houses he sold, the clients he met with, and then he'd leave and lock the door. And I'd be back in the dark. This is the pattern emerging. The space doesn't just trap the victim, it allows the predator to live normally. Kohlhepp would spend his mornings showing homes to families, his afternoons closing deals, his evenings visiting the container, and no one suspected a thing. Charlie Carver's body is found buried on the property. Is Kala the first? During interrogation, Kohlhepp is calm, almost bored. The detective asks him point-blank, why the container? Kohlhepp leans back, considers the question like it's a Yelp review he's about to write. Basements flood, attics get hot, containers are modular, climate-controlled if you do it right, portable. Portable? You can move them if you need to. The detective's pen stops moving. Did you need to? Kohlhepp just smiles. That smile is the crack that breaks everything open, because the container on his property, that was container 2. Container 1 is still missing. To this day, investigators believe there is another shipping container somewhere in the Carolinas that Todd Kohlhepp prepared but never used or never admitted to using. What's in container 1? But here's the thing that keeps detectives awake, the Amazon reviews, because buried in those 100-plus posts is one review that no one can explain. It's for a book called How to Disappear Completely and Never Be Found. 5 stars, posted in 2015. The review reads, "Great tips. Some of them I already knew. Some of them I wish I'd known sooner." 3 people are confirmed dead. 7 others remain on the missing persons list in that region, all last seen between 2013 and 2016. And Todd Kohlhepp won't say another word. What else did he build? The algorithm knew. Amazon's recommender engine saw his purchase patterns, locks, chains, shovels, tarps, knives, and started suggesting related products. It offered him bulk discounts on restraints. It recommended books on surveillance and evasion. The machine saw the pattern. It just didn't care. Because algorithms don't have ethics, they have optimization. And Todd Kohlhepp, he was a very optimized customer. If you've ever wondered what the digital age does to evil, whether it makes it easier to hide or easier to reveal, you're asking the right question. Because the next case is about someone who hid for 10 years. Not in the woods, not in a container, but on a residential street, where neighbors waved at him every morning, where kids played in the yard next door, where no one thought to look in the windows, because he didn't lock his victims in chains, he locked them in belief.
The investigation isn't over. We are currently digging into a network that makes this look like small change. To make sure you don't miss the file when we drop it, make sure you are subscribed. Case number 3, Ariel Castro. The house on Seymour Avenue, Cleveland, Ohio. How does evil hide in plain sight for 3,650 days? May 6, 2013, 5:53 p.m. A 911 call comes in from Cleveland's west side. The caller is frantic, breathless. "Help me, I'm Amanda Berry." The dispatcher pauses, because Amanda Berry has been missing since April 2003. For 10 years, her face has been on billboards, milk cartons, and vigil posters across Ohio. Her mother died believing her daughter was dead, and now she's on the phone screaming that she's been found, not by police, not by a search team, by herself. Because after a decade of captivity, Amanda Berry kicked down a door and ran into the street screaming for help. And the world finally looked at 2207 Seymour Avenue, a house they'd driven past 1,000 times, a house where a man named Ariel Castro had been living the entire time, with 3 women locked inside. How did no one know? When SWAT teams breached the house, they found Amanda Berry, Gina De Jesus, and Michelle Knight. Amanda had been missing for 10 years, Gina for 9, Michelle for 11. All 3 had been abducted as teenagers within blocks of each other. All 3 had given birth to children fathered by their captor. One of those children, Amanda Berry's daughter, was 6 years old when they were rescued. She'd never seen the outside world, a child born in a prison. The house itself became a crime scene that redefined what investigators thought was possible. From the outside, normal, peeling paint, overgrown lawn, but nothing alarming. From the inside, a labyrinth of locked doors, boarded windows, and chains bolted to the walls. Castro had sectioned off parts of the house to keep the women separated. He used alarm systems to alert him if anyone tried to move between rooms. He played music at high volumes to mask any sounds. But here's the part that breaks the pattern. He also let them watch TV. He gave them news access. They saw their own missing persons reports, watched their families on local broadcasts pleading for their return. And they couldn't do anything because Castro had convinced them of one simple truth: if you leave, your family will die. This is cognitive architecture at its most brutal. He didn't just imprison their bodies, he imprisoned their hope. Think about that. For a decade, these women knew their families were looking for them. They knew they were 3 miles from home. They knew the address. But the chains weren't the thing that kept them there. It was the belief that escape would cause more harm than staying. In the aftermath, journalists interviewed everyone who lived on Seymour Avenue, and the answers were all the same. He seemed normal. He'd wave when I drove by. I never heard anything. But that last one, that's a lie. Not an intentional lie, a cognitive one, because several neighbors did hear things. One reported hearing screams in 2011 and called police. Officers knocked on Castro's door. He answered, said everything was fine, and they left. Another neighbor saw a naked woman in a second-story window in 2012. She assumed it was Castro's girlfriend. A third saw children in the backyard and thought Castro had grandkids visiting. This is neighbor blindness. It's not that people didn't see, it's that they saw, and their brains refused to process it as danger. Because danger isn't supposed to look like a middle-aged man mowing his lawn on a Sunday. Danger isn't supposed to have a steady job as a school bus driver. Danger isn't supposed to wave. We trust the pattern. Ariel Castro's interrogation is one of the most chilling on record, not because he's violent, but because he's rational. He explains his system like a teacher presenting a lesson plan. You have to create structure, rules, rewards, punishments. You have to make them understand that cooperation is survival. The detective asks, "Did you ever think about letting them go?" Castro shrugs. Where would they go? Back to their lives, with everyone knowing what happened to them? I gave them a new life, a different one, sure, but a life. This is the cognitive delusion, the belief that the space they've created is a gift, a sanctuary, a home. How did no one know? They knew. The brain saw the data, but the pattern said impossible, so the data was discarded. This is why Ariel Castro got away with it for 3,650 days. Not because he was smart, but because we're wired to ignore things that don't fit the narrative of safe neighborhood. During sentencing, all 3 survivors gave impact statements. Michelle Knight looked directly at Castro and said, "You took 11 years of my life away, but I've got my life back. You'll spend the rest of yours in a cell, wondering what freedom feels like." Castro showed no emotion. 1 month into his life sentence, he was found dead in his cell. Suicide. And the house on Seymour Avenue, it was demolished in 2013. The city turned it into a public park. But if you talk to people who lived on that street, they'll tell you the same thing. They can't shake the feeling that the house is still there, that if they look too closely at the empty lot, they'll see the windows and something behind them, watching. How many other houses are we driving past? You're beginning to see it now, aren't you? The pattern. It's not about the predator, it's about the space and how we're trained to trust it. But what happens when the predator isn't a drifter or a realtor or a bus driver? What happens when he's a colonel in the Canadian Armed Forces? What happens when he's the man who flies the Prime Minister's plane? What happens when trust isn't something he exploits, it's something he wears as a uniform?
Case 4. Colonel Russell Williams, The Officer and the Photographs, Ontario, Canada. When does authority stop being protection and become camouflage? February 7th, 2010. A woman in the small town of Tweed, Ontario, returns home from work to find something wrong with her bedroom. Not destroyed, not ransacked, just rearranged. Her underwear drawer is open, a few items are missing, her bed has been slept in. She calls the police. They take a report and leave. 2 weeks later, another woman 3 streets away reports the same thing. Someone broke in while she was out, stole underwear, took photos of themselves in her bedroom wearing her clothes. The photos were left on her computer. Now the police start paying attention, because this isn't a burglary, it's a ritual, and rituals escalate. Who is this person, and what are they building toward? Ontario Provincial Police set up a task force. They mapped the break-ins, 82 incidents over 4 years. They analyzed the method, always through basement windows or unlocked doors, always when the occupant is away, always targeting women who live alone. They pull security footage from nearby homes, and that's when they see the vehicle. An SUV, dark-colored, registered plates partially visible. They run it. The vehicle is registered to Canadian Forces Base Trenton, specifically to the base commander, Colonel Russell Williams. If you've ever wondered how far someone can hide behind a title, behind respect, behind a uniform that makes people stand at attention, you're about to find out. Because Russell Williams didn't just break into homes, he broke into the idea of safety itself. February 8, 2010. Detective Sergeant Jim Smythe sits down across from Colonel Russell Williams in an interrogation room. Williams is still in uniform, still carrying himself with military precision, still believing he's smarter than everyone in the room. Smythe starts slow, friendly, asks Williams about his schedule, his duties, his vehicle. Williams answers calmly, offers details, smiles at the appropriate moments, and then Smythe drops the line that will become famous. "Russell, I want you to know we have your boot prints from the crime scenes, all of them." Williams blinks, just once, and Smythe knows he has him. For the next 3 hours, Smythe systematically dismantles Williams' defenses, not with aggression, with patience. He lets Williams think he's still in control, lets him explain, lets him rationalize, and slowly, over 180 minutes, Russell Williams confesses to 82 break-ins, thousands of stolen items, mostly lingerie, 2 sexual assaults, 2 murders, all while serving as one of the most decorated officers in Canadian military history. How does someone live 2 lives? The photographs are what destroy him, because Russell Williams didn't just break into homes, he documented it. He took thousands of photos of himself in the victims' bedrooms, wearing their clothes, posing in front of mirrors, arranging their belongings like trophies. In one photo, he's wearing a young girl's bathing suit, standing in her childhood bedroom, smiling at the camera. The girl was 12. In another, he's lying on a woman's bed, wearing her underwear, holding a photo of her family. These aren't compulsive acts, these are performances, and the audience was always the same: himself. What was he building toward? Murder. The break-ins were practice, the photographs were rehearsals, and eventually, staying in the house while the victim was away wasn't enough. He needed them to be there. Awake, aware. Jessica Lloyd disappeared on January 29, 2010. Her body was found a week later in a wooded area near Tweed. Cause of death? Asphyxiation. But the crime scene told a different story. Williams had kept her alive for hours, photographed her, made her pose, documented every moment, and when he was done, he dumped her body and went back to work. The next day, he flew the Canadian Prime Minister to an international summit. Let that sink in. A man who murdered someone the night before spent the following morning piloting the Prime Minister's aircraft, and no one noticed, because the uniform said trust, and we did. Russell Williams was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. His military rank was stripped, his medals were revoked, his name was removed from every commendation, every plaque, every record. But here's the thing about cognitive architecture. Williams didn't just use physical space to control victims, he used institutional space. His rank opened doors, his reputation closed questions, his uniform made people look away when their instincts said, "Look closer." The space he occupied wasn't a house or a container, it was authority itself, and he weaponized it for 4 years before anyone dared to ask, what if the person we're supposed to trust is the one we should fear? Authority is camouflage. You're halfway through now, and if you're feeling like the ground is shifting beneath you, like the rules of safety you've always believed in are starting to fracture, that's not an accident, because every case we've seen so far has been about predators who understood one thing: the space is the weapon. But the next case is different. The next case is about a predator who was the space, a man who didn't need to abduct anyone because he could simply visit again and again and again over 40 years, and no one stopped him. Not because they didn't know, because he was a cop.
Case number 5. Joseph DeAngelo. The man who visited at night. The Golden State Killer. What makes a killer wait 40 years to be caught? And why did he stop? April 24th, 2018. A 72-year-old man named Joseph DeAngelo is arrested outside his home in Citrus Heights, California. He's a retired police officer, a grandfather, a guy who complained about his neighbor's dogs and yelled at teenagers for skateboarding too loud. By all appearances, harmless. But the DNA they pulled from a discarded tissue outside his house told a different story. Joseph DeAngelo was the Golden State Killer, a man who terrorized California for over a decade in the 1970s and 80s. A man who committed at least 13 murders, 50-plus rapes, 120-plus burglaries, and then stopped, just vanished. For 40 years, he lived as a normal retiree while the cases went cold and the victims waited for answers. Why did he stop? And how did he get away with it for so long? The Golden State Killer didn't break in randomly. He prepared. Weeks, sometimes months before an attack, he would case the neighborhood. He'd break into homes while families were away, not to steal, but to learn. He'd unlock windows, move furniture, rearrange items so he'd know if anyone noticed. He was mapping the space. By the time he came back to attack, he already knew where the phone was, which doors stuck, which floorboards creaked, where the family kept their weapons. He'd already rehearsed the crime a dozen times in the victim's own home. And here's the part that makes it unbearable. Sometimes victims would report break-ins beforehand. They'd call the police and say, "Someone's in my house," and the police, DeAngelo's own colleagues, would file a report and leave, because a cop told them it was probably nothing. The system protected him. The Golden State Killer had a signature. He'd wake couples in the middle of the night, shine a flashlight in their eyes, force the woman to tie up the man with shoelaces. Then he'd place dishes on the man's back. "If I hear these dishes move," he'd say, "I'll kill her, then I'll kill you." And then he'd take the woman to another room. This is cognitive architecture at its most sadistic, because the man wasn't restrained by ropes or chains. He was restrained by responsibility, by the belief that any sound, any movement would end in death. Some of those men stayed frozen for hours after DeAngelo left. Even after they realized he was gone, they couldn't move, because the space had been reprogrammed. The bedroom wasn't a bedroom anymore. It was a cage made of fear. If you've ever felt like your body betrayed you in a moment of danger, like you froze when you should have fought, this is why. It's not weakness, it's a weapon, and DeAngelo spent a decade perfecting it. The DNA breakthrough. For 40 years, investigators had DNA from the crime scenes, but no match. DeAngelo had never been arrested for a violent crime, so his DNA wasn't in any criminal database. And then, in 2018, a forensic genealogist named Barbara Ray Venter had an idea. What if they uploaded the DNA to a public genealogy site? Sites like GEDmatch, where people upload their DNA to find distant relatives. They did, and they got a hit. Not a direct match, but a partial one, a distant cousin. From there, they built a family tree, narrowed down potential suspects, cross-referenced with age, location, and police records, and they found him. Joseph DeAngelo, retired police officer, living in plain sight. How did he get away with it? He didn't just evade capture. He understood the system, because he was the system. He knew how investigations worked. He knew what evidence to avoid. He knew how long DNA would last on fabric versus skin. And when technology finally caught up to him, he'd been free for 40 decades. June 29th, 2020. Joseph DeAngelo appears in court to hear victim impact statements. He's in a wheelchair now, frail, barely able to speak. One by one, survivors take the stand. They're in their 60s and 70s now. Decades have passed, but when they speak, they're teenagers again, describing the man who climbed through their windows, the man who whispered in the dark, the man who told them, "If you scream, I'll kill everyone you love." And DeAngelo sits there, silent, until one survivor, a woman named Gay Hardwick, looks directly at him and says, "You were a coward then, you're a coward now, and you'll die a coward." And for the first time, DeAngelo reacts. He looks up, just for a second, and then looks away. They outlived his terror. DeAngelo was sentenced to life without parole. He'll die there. But here's the question that haunts investigators. Why did he stop? Because between 1986 and 2018, Joseph DeAngelo committed 0 violent crimes, not a single assault, not a single break-in. He just stopped. Some psychologists think he aged out, lost the physical ability. Others think he got close to being caught and went dormant. But there's a third theory, and it's the most disturbing. What if he didn't stop? What if he just got better? What if the crimes after 1986 were so clean, so controlled, that they were never connected to him? Did he really stop? The Golden State Killer case changed forensic science forever. Genetic genealogy is now standard procedure, but it also opened a darker door. Because if DNA databases can catch killers, they can also catch anyone. Your privacy, your family tree, your genetic code, all of it is now searchable, mappable, weaponizable. Joseph DeAngelo was caught because science evolved. But the question remains, how many others are still out there waiting for the next breakthrough? And how many of them are sitting in a quiet house right now, watching the news, wondering when their time will come? If you've ever uploaded your DNA to a genealogy site, you've just made yourself part of the largest forensic database in human history. You're not just finding relatives, you're creating a map. And maps can be used to find anyone, even people who don't want to be found. The cases so far have been about control, about spaces designed to trap. But the next case is different. The next case is about a man who didn't believe in traps, because traps are for people who want to keep victims alive. And this man believed in theater. He believed that death wasn't enough. It had to be staged, arranged, performed. And the audience was always the same, the people who would find the bodies.
Case number 6, Richard Ramirez. The Night Stalker's Theology, Los Angeles, California. Can evil have a religion? And if it does, what does it worship? August 31st, 1985. A man is spotted peering into windows in the Mission Viejo neighborhood of Los Angeles. A resident calls the police, but before they arrive, the man breaks into a house. Inside, he attacks a couple in their sleep. The husband is shot in the head. The wife is assaulted and forced to swear allegiance to Satan. By the time police arrive, the attacker is gone, but he leaves something behind, a symbol, drawn in lipstick on the bedroom wall, a pentagram. This is how the Night Stalker operated, not with planning, not with precision, but with chaos. Richard Ramirez didn't stalk victims for weeks. He chose them at random, walked through neighborhoods looking for unlocked doors, open windows, any threshold he could cross. And once inside, he didn't follow a script, he improvised. Some victims were shot, some were stabbed, some were beaten, some were left alive to tell the story. The only constant was the symbol, the pentagram. Because Richard Ramirez didn't just believe in evil, he worshipped it. Why did he want witnesses? Why leave people alive?
By the summer of 1985, Los Angeles was in a state of panic. The Night Stalker had attacked over a dozen homes, killed 13 people, left survivors with stories that didn't make sense. He didn't fit a profile, didn't have a type, didn't follow a pattern, except one. He always entered through an open window or unlocked door. So the city locked itself down. Hardware stores sold out of deadbolts. Locksmiths worked 24-hour shifts. People who'd never locked their doors in their lives started barricading themselves inside. And Richard Ramirez loved it, because fear was the performance, and the audience was everyone. August 30th, 1985. Police release a mugshot of Richard Ramirez. It's grainy, black and white, but it's enough. By the next morning, his face is on every newspaper in California. Ramirez doesn't know. He's in Arizona visiting family. When he returns to LA on a Greyhound bus, he stops at a convenience store to buy a soda and sees his face on the cover of every magazine. He runs. For 6 blocks, he sprints through East LA trying to disappear into the neighborhood. But the people recognize him. They chase him, corner him, beat him. By the time police arrive, Richard Ramirez is barely conscious, and the crowd is chanting, "Kill him, kill him, kill him." This is what happens when the predator loses the space, when the city he terrorized becomes the cage, when the performance is over and the audience wants blood. Richard Ramirez's trial was a spectacle. He showed up in sunglasses, smiled at the cameras, flashed the pentagram he'd carved into his palm. During testimony, he'd laugh. When survivors described their attacks, he'd blow kisses. And when the verdict was read, guilty on 13 counts of murder, he leaned into the microphone and said, "Big deal. Death always comes with the territory. I'll see you in Disneyland." This wasn't bravado. This was theology. Because Richard Ramirez genuinely believed that he was serving a higher power, that his crimes were acts of worship, that death wasn't an ending, it was a sacrament. How does someone believe this? Psychologists who interviewed Ramirez described him as cognitively intact but morally inverted. He understood right and wrong. He just believed wrong was right. And here's where the pattern shifts. Every case so far has been about control, about predators who built cages, physical or psychological, to keep victims trapped. But Richard Ramirez didn't want control. He wanted art. He wanted his crime scenes to be beautiful, to tell a story, to be remembered. And the only way to do that was to stage them, like a director, like a performance, like a play where the victims were props and death was the final curtain. He became a martyr to some. You're over an hour in now, and if you're starting to feel like the world is darker than you thought, like the places you considered safe are just illusions built on trust and luck, you're not wrong. But there's something else happening. You're starting to see the architecture. The way predators think about space, the way they transform doors into traps, rooms into cages, and homes into monuments to their control. But the next case takes it further, because the next predator didn't just want control, he wanted art. He wanted his crime scenes to be beautiful, to tell a story, to be remembered, and the only way to do that was to stage them like a director, like a performance, like a play where the victims were props and death was the final curtain.
Case 7. Danny Rolling, Gainesville, Florida. Why do some killers treat crime scenes like art galleries? August 24th, 1990. The University of Florida is preparing for the fall semester. Students are moving into off-campus apartments. Parents are helping them unpack. The campus is alive with the chaos of new beginnings. And in a small duplex on Southwest 24th Avenue, two roommates, Sonia Larson and Christina Powell, are settling into their new place. They don't know it yet, but someone has already been inside. Someone who's been watching, waiting, planning. August 26, 1990. A maintenance worker enters the duplex to fix a broken air conditioner. He opens the door and finds a scene that will haunt Gainesville for the next 3 decades. The bodies of Sonia Larson and Christina Powell have been arranged. Not dumped, not left where they fell. Arranged, posed, positioned to face the door as if greeting whoever entered. And on the wall, written in blood, "Welcome." Why stage it? What is the purpose of the performance? Over the next 4 days, 3 more students are murdered. Krista Hoyt, Tracy Powles, Manuel Taboa. Each crime scene is the same. The victims are posed. The bodies are arranged to create a tableau. Krista Hoyt's body is found seated upright, her head placed on a bookshelf across the room, positioned so her eyes appear to be watching the door. Tracy Powles and Manuel Taboa are posed together as if frozen mid-conversation. And at every scene, there are elements that investigators describe as theatrical. Candles, mirrors, personal items moved and rearranged to create symmetry. This isn't rage. This isn't chaos. This is direction. Why does a killer care about composition? The city of Gainesville shuts down. Classes are canceled. Students flee the campus. Parents arrive to pull their children out of dorms. Within a week, over 30% of the student body has left. The rest stay, but they don't sleep. They form patrols, lock their doors, sleep in shifts with weapons nearby, because the Night Stalker terrorized Los Angeles by being random, but the Gainesville Ripper terrorized an entire university by being meticulous, by showing them that death could be designed. Danny Rolling wasn't caught because of forensic evidence. He was caught because he told someone. While in prison for an unrelated robbery, Rolling confided in a fellow inmate, described the murders in detail, explained the posing, the staging, the reasoning. He said, "I wanted them to be remembered, not just as victims, as art." The inmate reported it. Police obtained a confession, and in 1994, Danny Rolling was sentenced to death. Why stage the scenes? Because Rolling believed that murder without presentation was just violence, but murder with composition, that was immortality. Case 7 continues, the courtroom songs. During his trial, Danny Rolling did something no one expected. He sang. In the middle of testimony about the victims, he'd break into song, original compositions, ballads about darkness, about shadows, about the spirit that guided him. The judge tried to stop him, but Rolling argued it was his way of expressing remorse, of giving the victims a voice. It wasn't remorse, it was the final performance. Because even in the courtroom, even in chains, Danny Rolling was still the director. He made his trial part of the show. Danny Rolling was executed by lethal injection on October 25, 2006. His last words were, "I'm sorry for what I've done. I hope they find peace." But he wasn't sorry. Because in his final interview, recorded weeks before his execution, he said, "People will talk about what I did for 100 years. I'm part of history now." That was the point. And he's right. The Gainesville Ripper is studied in criminal psychology courses, analyzed in documentaries, referenced in discussions about the performer-killer archetype. Danny Rolling got exactly what he wanted. The killer won the narrative. You've seen 7 cases now.
7 predators who transformed space into traps, homes into prisons, and victims into objects. But the next case is different, because the next predator didn't break into someone's home. He was the home. His house wasn't a crime scene, it was a graveyard. And the neighbors didn't notice, not for years, not until the smell became unbearable. And by then, there were 11 bodies buried in the walls.
Case 8. Anthony Sowell. The House That Ate People, Cleveland, Ohio. When does a house stop being a structure and become a disposal system? October 29, 2009. A woman reports a sexual assault to Cleveland police. The suspect, a man named Anthony Sowell, living on Imperial Avenue in the Mount Pleasant neighborhood. Police obtain a warrant. When they arrive at 122005 Imperial Avenue, they're expecting to find evidence of an assault. What they find instead is a morgue. How many bodies? How long have they been there? The smell hit them the moment they opened the door. Not the smell of garbage or decay, the smell of death, thick, pervasive, unmistakable. Officers search the first floor. Nothing. They move upstairs. In a bedroom, they find the first body, wrapped in plastic, shoved into a crawl space. Then another, and another. By the end of the day, they've found 11 bodies, some in the walls, some in the basement, some buried in shallow graves in the backyard. And all of them have been there for years. They lived in a graveyard disguised as a home. The question everyone asked was the same. How did no one notice? Because the smell wasn't subtle. Neighbors had been complaining for months. One resident said it smelled like rotting meat and sewage. Another said she couldn't open her windows in summer because the stench was unbearable. But when they called the city to complain, they were told it was coming from a nearby sausage factory. The factory had been closed for 3 years, but no one checked, because Anthony Sowell was quiet, polite, kept to himself. And in neighborhoods like Mount Pleasant, where poverty is high and city resources are low, people learn not to ask too many questions. The system failed because the victims were invisible. When forensic teams processed the house, they found something that made the investigation even darker. Anthony Sowell had engineered the house for disposal. He'd reinforced walls to hide bodies, dug pits in the basement designed to hold remains, sealed crawl spaces with plastic sheeting to contain decomposition. This wasn't improvisation, this was design. He'd turned his home into a functional body disposal system, and he'd been perfecting it for years. How many bodies? At least 11 confirmed, but investigators believe there are more, because the house was old, the foundation was crumbling, and there were parts of the basement they couldn't excavate without risking collapse. To this day, no one knows the true number. Anthony Sowell's trial was short. He didn't deny the murders, he just denied that they mattered. They were already dead, he told the court. Drugs, poverty, the streets. I just sped up the process. This is the cognitive dissonance of the predator, the belief that the victims were already lost, that the space, the neighborhood, the system, the world had already discarded them, and he was just the final step in a process that started long before he touched them. He blamed the system he exploited. Anthony Sowell was sentenced to death. He died in prison in 2021 from a terminal illness before the execution could be carried out. The house on Imperial Avenue was demolished. The lot remains empty. But if you talk to people who still live in that neighborhood, they'll tell you something strange. They still smell it.
On certain nights, when the wind shifts, they say you can still catch it. The smell of rot, of death, of a house that became a tomb. Some spaces never heal. If you've ever walked past a house and felt something wrong, not seen, just felt, trust that instinct, because sometimes the space knows before we do. Sometimes the architecture itself is the warning, and sometimes we ignore it because the alternative is too terrifying to accept. We're in the final stretch now, 2 cases left, and both of them are about the same thing, engineering, because the predators you're about to meet didn't just use space, they built it. From scratch, with blueprints, calculations, reinforced steel. They designed prisons the way architects design homes, and when they were done, the victims didn't just enter the space, they became part of it. Let's start with the man who built a pit.
Case 9. Gary Heidnik. The Pit. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. What does it take to build a prison no one escapes, and why would someone try? March 24th, 1987. A woman runs through the streets of North Philadelphia, screaming. She's naked, covered in bruises. Her wrists are raw from restraints. A driver stops and calls the police. When officers arrive, the woman tells them a story that sounds impossible. She says she's been held captive in a basement for months, chained to a pipe, starved, tortured. She says there are others still down there, and she gives them an address, 3520 North Marshall Street. What's in the basement, and how did he keep them there? When police breached the house, they found Gary Heidnik upstairs, calm and unresisting. He didn't ask why they're there. He just pointed to the floor. She came from down there, he says. Officers open the basement door, and the smell hits them like a wall. Gary Heidnik's basement wasn't a room, it was a system. He dug a pit in the center of the floor, 4 feet deep, lined with concrete. He'd installed chains bolted to the walls. He'd rigged a pulley system to the ceiling to lift and move victims. And he'd soundproofed the entire space so no one outside could hear screams. When officers descended the stairs, they found 3 women, chained, malnourished, barely conscious, but alive. And in the corner, wrapped in plastic bags, were the remains of 2 others who hadn't survived. The living and the dead, feet apart. What was in the basement? A prison built to last. But here's the question that haunted investigators. Why? Why did Gary Heidnik build this? During interrogation, Gary Heidnik explained his plan. He wanted to create a baby factory. He believed he could kidnap women, hold them in the basement, impregnate them, and raise the children as his own. He saw himself as a patriarch, a provider, a man building a family in the only way he knew. By force, by engineering, by control. How does someone rationalize this? The trial revealed that Heidnik had been perfecting this system for years. He'd studied engineering, read books on construction and restraint systems. He'd even tested the pit with mannequins before kidnapping his first victim. This wasn't impulsive, this was planned. And the most disturbing part? It almost worked. Because the women he held captive didn't just give up trying to escape, they started managing the space. One victim testified that she'd helped Heidnik dispose of a body, not because she wanted to, but because cooperation was survival. Another said she'd cooked meals for the other prisoners using the food Heidnik provided. They'd created a hierarchy, a routine, a system within the system. Because when escape is impossible, the brain adapts. It finds a way to survive, even if survival means becoming complicit. Survival became collaboration.
Gary Heidnik was executed by lethal injection on July 6, 1999. His last meal was black coffee and 2 slices of cheese pizza. His last words were, "I'm sorry for what I did." But investigators who worked the case don't believe he was sorry, because in the months before his execution, he received letters from women asking to visit him, women who wanted to understand him, women who were fascinated by the system he'd built. And some of those women later admitted they'd fantasized about being in that basement, not as victims, as participants. This is the final horror of Gary Heidnik, not just that he built the pit, but that the pit, as an idea, continues to exist in the minds of people who read about it. The space outlives the predator. One case left, and it's the one that redefines everything you've seen so far. Because every predator we've discussed built their trap in a fixed location, a house, a basement, a container. But the final predator understood something the others didn't. Fixed locations are vulnerable. They can be searched, surrounded, raided. But what if the prison wasn't a place? What if home could move?
Case number 10.
Robert Ben Rhoades, the truck stop killer. What happens when the predator's lair can drive away? April 1st, 1990, Arizona Highway Patrol pulls over an 18-wheeler for a routine inspection near Casa Grande. The driver, a man named Robert Ben Rhoades, is cooperative, provides his license and registration without issue. But one of the troopers notices something strange. The truck's cab has been modified. There are additional locks on the sleeper compartment, blackout curtains, reinforced panels. The trooper asks to see inside. Rhoades hesitates, just for a second. But that's enough. When they open the sleeper compartment, they find a woman chained to the wall, naked, covered in bruises, and behind her, mounted on the wall, is a camera. How many others were there? And where are the photos? Robert Ben Rhoades' truck wasn't just a vehicle, it was a mobile prison. He'd spent years modifying it, soundproofing the walls. In
Case 105. Robert Ben Rhoades, the truck stop killer.
What happens when the predator's lair can drive away? April 1st, 1990, Arizona Highway Patrol pulls over an 18-wheeler for a routine inspection near Casa Grande. The driver, a man named Robert Ben Rhoades, is cooperative, provides his license and registration without issue. But one of the troopers notices something strange. The truck's cab has been modified. There are additional locks on the sleeper compartment, blackout curtains, reinforced panels. The trooper asks to see inside. Rhoades hesitates, just for a second. But that's enough. When they open the sleeper compartment, they find a woman chained to the wall, naked, covered in bruises, and behind her, mounted on the wall, is a camera. How many others were there? And where are the photos? Robert Ben Rhoades' truck wasn't just a vehicle, it was a mobile prison. He'd spent years modifying it, soundproofing the walls, installing chains and restraints at precise anchor points, building hidden compartments for tools, weapons, and, most disturbingly, souvenirs. When investigators processed the truck, they found hundreds of photographs, restraints in multiple sizes, torture implements, personal items belonging to women who'd been reported missing along truck routes for over a decade. Robert Ben Rhoades had been operating for at least 15 years, driving across the country, picking up hitchhikers, sex workers, runaways, anyone vulnerable, bringing them into the truck, and making sure they never left. A predator who could cross state lines. There's one photo that's become infamous. It's of a teenage girl named Regina K. Walters. She's standing in a barn somewhere in rural Illinois, wearing a black dress and heels that are too big for her.
Her face is frozen in terror. Her hands are raised as if trying to block the camera. This photo was taken moments before Robert Ben Rhoades killed her, and he kept it, not hidden, not locked away, mounted on the wall of his truck where he could see it every day. She knew what was coming. How many others? No one knows. Robert Ben Rhoades is confirmed to have killed at least 3 women, but investigators believe the number is closer to 50, because for 15 years he drove across the entire United States. His truck was his home, his hunting ground, his mobile crime scene. And because he crossed state lines, cases were never connected. A missing person in Texas, a body in Oklahoma, a disappearance in Nevada, all separate, all unsolved, until the truck was opened. Robert Ben Rhoades' trial focused on 3 murders: Regina Tay Walters, Ricky Lee Jones, and Patricia Walsh, all young, all vulnerable, all taken from truck stops. During testimony, forensic psychologists described Rhoades as methodical and patient. He didn't kill impulsively. He kept victims alive for days, sometimes weeks, inside the truck, moving from state to state, stopping at rest areas and truck stops, and no one suspected a thing, because truck drivers are invisible. They're part of the infrastructure. They blend into the background of every highway, every rest stop, every forgotten stretch of road. The invisible predator. Robert Ben Rhoades was sentenced to life in prison without parole. He's still alive, still in custody, still refusing to provide information about other victims, because that's his final act of control. Not over the space, not over the truck, but over the narrative. As long as he holds those secrets, the families of missing women will never have closure. And he knows it. Some answers will never come.
10 predators, 10 spaces, 10 thresholds that became traps. And now the question we opened with: what makes a place stop being a home and become a tomb you walk into willingly? The answer isn't about locks or chains or physical barriers. It's about cognitive architecture. It's about the moment when your brain stops seeing the space as dangerous and starts seeing it as inevitable. Every predator we've discussed understood this. Shawn Grate made his victim believe that leaving would cause more harm than staying. Todd Kohlhepp made his victim believe the container was the only reality. Ariel Castro made his victims believe the outside world had forgotten them. Russell Williams made society believe the uniform meant safety. Joseph DeAngelo made couples believe that movement meant death. Richard Ramirez made an entire city believe that locked doors were the only protection. Danny Rolling made crime scenes into performances that would outlive him. Anthony Sowell made a house into a graveyard no one noticed. Gary Heidnik made a pit into a family. Robert Ben Rhoades made a truck into a nationwide hunting ground. They didn't just use space, they weaponized it. And here's the part that should terrify you. This doesn't require genius. It requires understanding one simple truth about human psychology. We trust the familiar. We trust homes because we've been taught they're safe. We trust authority because we've been taught it protects us. We trust vehicles because we've been taught they're just transportation. And predators know this. They know that the best trap is the one that doesn't look like a trap. So how do you protect yourself? How do you recognize when a space has been weaponized? Here are the patterns. 1. Isolation.
If someone tries to separate you from others, physically, emotionally, digitally, that's the first warning. 2. Controlled information. If someone manages what you know about the outside world, they're building a cognitive cage. 3. Unpredictable reinforcement. If someone alternates between kindness and cruelty in ways you can't predict, they're creating dependency. 4. Graduated compliance. If someone asks for small concessions that escalate over time, they're mapping your boundaries. 5. Spatial familiarity. If someone has been in your space without your knowledge, moved things, unlocked doors, left signs, they're rehearsing. These aren't just warning signs, they're the blueprints. And once you see them, you can't unsee them. You now see what they see. You've spent the last hour inside the minds of predators. You've seen how they think, how they plan, how they transform ordinary spaces into prisons. And now you have something they don't want you to have. Awareness. Because the only thing that stops a predator who weaponizes space is a victim who recognizes the architecture. If you made it this far, you're not here for entertainment. You're here because you understand that knowledge is survival, that awareness is the only defense against a world where danger doesn't always look dangerous. And if you've ever felt unsafe in a space you were told was safe, if you've ever trusted someone you later realized you shouldn't have, you're not alone. You're part of the reason stories like this need to be told. Because the only way we stop the next threshold from becoming a trap is by teaching each other to see the warning signs before the door closes. Thank you for walking this path with me. Stay aware, stay safe, and remember, the space is listening. Make sure you're listening back.